You know it would be really post-punk?
No, what?
Subscribing to Mark Will and Tomek on Substack.
Oh, how can I do that?
Go to markwillwrite.substack.com and tomekb.substack.com.
Okay, I will, but only ironically.
Texting.
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 Texting. Texting. Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting.
Mark Will and Tomek present.
Texting.
Hello all you textual deviants and welcome to another episode of Texting with me, Tomek, in Leningrad.
Is that Tomek of Substack? TomekB.substack.com?
If you don't know, now you know.
Okay, well, I'm Mark Will of Substack. That's Mark Will Write, WRITE.substack.com. And I'm in Taipei tonight. For how long, we don't know.
And I don't know how long I'll be here either, but
Nobody knows. What a world we live in.
it's more exciting.
Anything can happen at any time.
It's more exciting when you don't know, when you have to treat each day like it could be your last. Adds a little extra spice, a little pepper. No, but I shouted out Leningrad on our intro today because today we're focusing on the most iconic band from Leningrad and probably in modern Russian history. That is the band Kino. And I used to pronounce it Kino, but I've been corrected, so it's Kino. And
Kino.
yeah, so today Mark
But
and
it's
I...
it's like German Kino, meaning movie theater.
Yeah,
Cinema.
or cinema, you're right.
Yeah.
So...
Sorry to interrupt.
okay.
When did the name change occur, by the way? Immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union, they reverted back to St. Petersburg?
I think it's 1991, so it sounds like that, right?
Okay.
You would have liked where I was at today. I was at a metro station, and yeah, they had this sign that said like Leningrad 1925 to 1991, and then St. Petersburg 1991 onwards.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I just wanted to say that Mark and I don't necessarily have as specific of a focus on this episode as we tend to have in terms of one specific text. It was hard to narrow that down. So among the topics we'll be discussing today are a film called Leto, which means summer, and it's a tribute to the Russian musical sound of the 1980s, and especially this period of glasnost or perekrostok. I think I'm saying that wrong. Because there's a supermarket here called Perekrostok, and I don't want to call it that. So let me just...
Perestroika.
Perestroika, thank you. Not Perekrostok, okay.
And glasnost, right?
Yes, so...
I'm probably pronouncing it wrong too, but that's the anglicized pronunciation I heard in Cold War America.
That's pretty good, actually. That sounds good. So, yeah, we'll be discussing this film directed by Kirill Serebrennikov, quite a controversial filmmaker, and came out in 2018. It won the Cannes Soundtrack Awards, also won the Best Production Designer at 2018 European Film Awards. Controversial in some ways, and we'll get into that. So we'll be discussing that. We'll be discussing the legacy of Viktor Tsoi, the songwriter for Kino, who died tragically at age 28 in a car accident in Latvia. And we'll also be discussing one album in particular called Grupa Krovi, which translates as Blood Type or Blood Group, sixth studio album by Kino, released in 1988. And we'll be discussing one song, which is not featured on that album, but is possibly their most famous song, and is called Хочу перемен, which basically means I want change, or I want changes. And so that's a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
That was my main focus.
Okay.
Хочу перемен.
But you did also watch this film, so...
I watched the film earlier this afternoon, but the past week I've had Хочу перемен on repeat.
Nice.
But I did listen to some Grupa Krovi
Awesome.
this afternoon too. Very different sound, but we'll get into that.
Okay, so
what do we start with?
Well, I just want to, again, maybe just explain to people a little bit about Kino in terms of this is the most iconic band in Russia. If you ever do get a chance to visit Russia and you go to one of your cliche tourist shops that's like a stand outside, let's say, on a historical corner of St. Petersburg, you'll see your Matrushka dolls, you'll see T-shirts of the film Brat, which is like a cult film from the early 90s that documents St. Petersburg in this like wild mafia freewheeling early 90s flavor before Putin kind of got a hold of things in a good way at that point in Russian history. And then you'll also see T-shirts for the band Kino, and most notably you'll see the frontman Viktor Tsoi pictured, and so he represents to Russian people what I was trying to think of equivalents earlier, but maybe something like Tupac for Americans, but obviously not everybody listens to hip hop. But he's the guy who, the good die young kind of vibe, and he's just the musical icon for modern Russia. And
he's the Kurt Cobain.
The Kurt Cobain, possibly, yeah. And St. Petersburg.
May I?
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is The last thing I'll say is just St. Petersburg is the cultural capital of Russia, as we know, and oftentimes you'll have buskers playing in various points in the city, and this is the music that is like on every busker's guitar, and a lot of the music is quite simple to play, I guess. The chord structures are not particularly difficult. The lyrics are quite everyman, and so in that sense, it's ubiquitous as well. So you hear it on the street still today. Okay, jump in, please. That was a long-winded intro.
Well, that's good. I mean, I don't have that background information. Before I touch upon what I wanted to mention, though, didn't you do some field work recently? Like you went to a shrine or a park dedicated to Tsoi?
I did. It was slightly underwhelming, but that's fine. There are a few spots in St. Petersburg related or dedicated to Tsoi. It sounds like the place I need to go to is a museum that's been made in his previous flat, and he worked in the underground boiler room there. So they've now converted that spot into a museum not only dedicated to him, but I think also other Russian rock icons, and they have concerts there every night. There's also some sort of memorial somewhere where I didn't go, but I went to what's called Viktor Tsoi Square, which is on the island where I live, and it was the only thing I found were 3 graffiti murals dedicated to him, and someone had spray painted neon green, like on his eyes, and then right next to Viktor Tsoi there was a graffiti painting of John Lennon, and I was like, heartened to see that, but then someone had written like "cum bucket" on his forehead.
On Lennon's or
on Lennon's, and and there was all this like white around his mouth, so kind of took the glamour away from that particular graffiti painting. So thank you, street artists, for that contribution.
John Lennon, the cum bucket.
Oh man, people are relentless. People are brutal. So
of course, I'm, when I first started looking into Kino or Kino, I was immediately struck by the fact that Tsoi is not a typical Russian name, and that's because it's actually a Korean name.
Right.
The Korean, as we know, would be Che. So this is the Russified version of that.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Oh yeah, it's Che.
Okay.
In English it would be transliterated CHOI. So it, I guess we usually say Choi, right? But it's Che.
Right.
In Korean.
Okay.
So his father was Korean. His mother was Russian. I mean, his father was Russian too, but Korean Russian. She's, what do we say? Russian, Slavic Russian.
Right. And his grandfather was born in North Korea, apparently.
Well, and so the father's parents, as I guess North Korean immigrants to Soviet Russia, or I don't know how they got there, but they were exiled to Kazakhstan by Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, like all the Koreans in the, I don't know, maybe in the eastern part of, in the Russian Far East were exiled to Kazakhstan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the reason, but I did see that. So that's his heritage, Korean father, Russian mother.
Right.
Which makes him different.
Right.
Right. He looks different. He has a different background. He has kind of outsider status, which I guess is good for a rock and roller.
Right.
But as you mentioned, he died early, 28, in a car crash in Latvia, you said?
That's right.
So
Which was
he just
part of the
missed,
USSR.
Right. But he just missed being in the 27 club. You know about that?
No, I mean, I Googled musicians who died before the age of 30, but I'm going to guess it's people like Hendrix. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the first member was Robert Johnson, the legendary blues guitarist from Mississippi who allegedly sold his soul to the devil, right? He died at 27. Mm-hmm. But then, yes, Hendrix, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Janis Joplin.
I was going to say Janis Joplin.
Kurt Cobain.
Okay.
Amy Winehouse.
Okay.
Some people
I love Amy Winehouse.
Don't like to include her, but she was 27.
She's amazing.
And then, there are other... I don't dislike her either, but some people say she wasn't
right
enough of a rocker, but whatever. She was 27. And then, there are other pop icons like Basquiat. He was 27. He's an artist, but kind of a rock star in his own right. So, Tsoi just missed being in the club, by a few months.
Right. No, I think it's important to mention that because obviously he gets that additional like martyr and mystique status.
Sure.
100%.
Yeah. Just like Cum Bucket John Lennon, who died
oh God.
I think he was 40.
Right.
I think he was 40, but he's not in the 27 club, but he's still in the martyrs club, I guess you could say.
But what's better, to be a martyr or to be knighted by the queen?
Oh man. You're asking if I'm a Paul or John guy?
No, I think it was just like a weird dig at the queen and knighthood, which we got into last week, and
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Paul has been sirred. Is that knighted? I don't know.
Yeah, that's knighted. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you're asking, is it better to be Paul or John? I mean, again, both and. It's not either or. But where was I going with this? We're talking about Tsoi boy.
Yeah.
What's the situation now? I think you were going to interview some contemporary Russians and ask their opinions about Tsoi himself and Kino's music. Did you have a chance to do that?
I haven't managed to conduct any interviews. I have one guy, Yegor, who might be willing to chat with us, but yeah, I mean, I think we should also specify that clearly we can't speak to Kino like Russians can. I've been listening to them pretty consistently for like the last year, but somebody who was alive at that time would obviously be a much better resource in some aspects. But what I think we can do is just kind of talk about our more immediate reactions to this band, and I think there are a lot of interesting questions for what it means to be a Russian rock star at that time, today, and yeah, does it matter? I mean, what is the role of non-English speaking musicians in the world? Like, how dictated is the Western canon to the world? I mean, you got a feel for that in the movie, just the importance of the Western canon.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, there are no American or British rock musicians poring over the lyrics of Kino in the same way that, Viktor Tsoi and Mike, what's his name?
No, Menko, I believe, yeah.
Right, we're like researching microscopically analyzing the lyrics of the Beatles, the Stones, the Smiths, Bowie, and so on.
Right.
It's just different, So my, most of my impressions of, again, I focused on Хочу перемен. Most of my impressions have more to do with the music. I read some translations of the lyrics. I have a general idea. I mean, basically, it's some everyday imagery of people, I guess, living under Soviet conditions.
I think conditions 80s, is the right word,
But the chorus is, we want changes, right? So, and it's just, that's the refrain that's repeated multiple times.
Right.
And of course, it reminds me of other famous changes songs. There's Bowie's, and then there's one by Yes. But musically, the track, as I mentioned to you earlier this week, reminds me a lot of the Smiths' Barbarism Begins at Home. Like, when I first heard this, I immediately thought of that. And Barbarism Begins at Home came out in 1985, and I think Хочу перемен was written in 86. It appeared in that movie in 87, and then was recorded in the studio in 89.
In France, by the way. Did you read that?
Right, I did see that, yes.
Yeah.
So, I wonder, I read elsewhere that Tsoi was a Smiths fan, so there's probably some influence. I'm not alleging any kind of plagiarism. That just often happens.
Right, sure.
You write things that sound like, the stuff you're listening to some degree, or you can't help but be influenced by it. But it's a great track. I mean, it's a solid rocker,
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting is how it seems to have been, I mean, from what I've read, this is their most famous song, and I think you just confirmed that. But why is that? Like, why has it been co-opted by so many different groups? And I guess, it became a kind of glasnost or perestroika anthem,
right,
with apparently with Gorbachev's encouragement. So how does that happen? Did you find out anything about that?
No, I mean, I read the same stuff probably that you did, but how it happened beyond the fact that there's just the word change, right? And so that is like so central that and probably because it's a good song, right? So people just those two things pair together. And
well, I read that Tsoi later was not thrilled about all the attention it got.
Right.
He said, I was talking about personal change rather than political. I mean, maybe he was being a bit coy, like Bob Dylan would be with his, with some of his protest songs. Oh, that's not what I meant. Even though he had to have known they could be interpreted that way.
Yeah, I think that and for musicians, sometimes just the world of journalism can be quite crass, and they want to keep their art separate from it.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely I think it's more personal for him, yeah, as you said. But
what exactly did Gorbachev say? Like, he quoted it in some interview, like, yes, as the song says, we want changes, or something like that.
well, I guess he was maybe seeing himself, he was happy for that to be a slogan for his own reign. Maybe reign's the wrong word to use for someone who's trying to be more democratic, but he was encouraging this change in Russia, right? This opening up and this liberalization of the economy. So that he was okay with this kind of becoming a reflection of his period in power. And
but is it like when some asshole like Ronald Reagan adopts Springsteen's "Born in the USA" as his theme song, or I don't know, even more egregious would be like Trump playing "Rocking in the Free World" or something like that at his rallies?
It's hard because Gorbachev is kind of like a positive figure for me, right? And right now, I mean, that's a whole like other conversation, but that like Putin sees the fall of the USSR as like one of the most tragic moments in Russian history. So
yes,
yeah. So
well, and
he's now villainized by the official
hardline
state government. Hello?
Yeah. You still there?
You were
Did
saying?
I lose you?
Yeah. It's okay. You were just saying many hardline communists, and then I didn't hear the next thing.
Yeah, many hardline communists view him as a traitor. Like they say, he didn't legally have the right to dissolve the Soviet Union, and many people even in the West see it as a tragedy because then there was no check on U.S. imperialism.
Right.
Like with the fall of the Soviets, we found ourselves in this unipolar world. There was détente was a good thing, basically, and so with the fall of the Soviet Union, we lost that, and then the U.S. thought it was free to basically dictate what was going to happen to the rest of the world.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I guess the positive would be that a lot of the world sighed of, what is the expression? Sighed a breath of relief? But because of the maybe
heaved a sigh of relief.
Heaved a sigh of relief because of the maybe nuclear tension that was reduced. Nuclear war tension.
And here we are again, folks.
Yeah, exactly. It's a...
Well,
I don't know how heavy we want to go into that stuff. I don't think we want to really do that.
No, probably not at this moment,
Yeah.
But since we're talking about this, it reminds me of that moment in the film where the old, I don't know, maybe he was a former member of the Red Army or something. He confronts the punks on the train, and he says, "You're singing our enemy's songs. The U.S. is our enemy. They're our ideological enemy."
Right. That's a great scene. It's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, and even though that old man is not a sympathetic character, it made me pause and wonder, like, well, even if that wasn't the intention of Tsoi and company, their artwork, their music probably was exploited for propagandistic purposes by people who didn't understand it or didn't care about the real meaning, but just saw an opportunity to score certain political points.
You mean
know?
so? You mean how the Western world would have exploited the message of stuff like Kino?
Yeah, but that theory falls apart when you consider the relative obscurity of Kino in the West. Like, I never heard of them until you mentioned them, right? Like, you would. That's the sort of thing. You know how like the dissident Chinese artist Ai Weiwei is celebrated in the West for all the wrong reasons.
I get you.
For all the wrong reasons, or I don't know. Solzhenitsyn was a hero of American media because he had all those critical things to say about the Soviet Union, but they you know, that's just for American audiences. So
I mean, I think we have to hope that there's like one universal artistic community that shows solidarity with one another, right? And so, forgetting nationhoods, like we're all bound together as people who believe in art and values, and you know, I'd like to see it more like that, more idealistically.
Sure, you
like
and
they're
I
on the
can.
Same team. Yeah, but
yeah,
you
you and I can, but I'm just for me too. But I'm just, you know, there's always the question of who gets promoted,
no question,
who gets left behind. And as I was watching this movie, Summer, what's the Russian pronunciation? Lieto.
Yeah.
Lieto. Don't let Liliana hear me. As I was watching that, I was thinking of the Hunter S. Thompson quote. You know, some people get rich, others eat shit and die. You know, this Leningrad Rock Club, right?
Right.
That Tsoi and his band have to basically audition for, and they have to get their fucking lyrics approved, you know, to play there, or else they can only play at house parties.
Right.
I mean, it's I was thinking about how that differs from, you know, the musical community that I guess I have tried to break into, you know. Like I can create music, I can distribute it, release it, but you know, if millions and millions of other people are doing that, how do I get heard? Like, there's always some gatekeeper, whether it's a Soviet censor or, you know, Spotify algorithms or something like that. You know what I mean?
I do. But I mean, I guess people would say that it's good now because music's been more democratized and like, you know, I mean, if your issue is the amount of other artists, so that's not necessarily a bad issue to have, right?
No, not at all. No. I'm not saying it is, but I mean, they're always. Brian Eno talks about this, you know, the difference between genius and what he calls genius. You know, the idea of genius is like there are certain people that are the important ones and everyone else was just, you know, a footnote. But really we should look at the scene. It's not about who became most celebrated, but what was the scene? Like none of that would have happened without the scene. Like Shakespeare wouldn't have happened without the Elizabethan movement in the arts, and Viktor Tsoi we wouldn't know about his music were it not for this underground Leningrad rock scene, you know.
Well, I think this is like a fascinating question that you're raising, actually, and it's like one that I've interrogated quite a bit in my own brain for the last week or two, is because like I'm giving Kino this really celebrated status in my own ears in terms of like how much I'm playing the shit out of them. Like I'm becoming this like 14-year-old fanboy of Viktor Tsoi, you know, like I'm ready to get a poster and make a shrine. and you know, and I like the whole package. I like, you know, I'm attracted to him like physically. I like the Korean aspect. Like I watched one of his videos that, he wears makeup, so he's like very, what's that word when someone's not a defined gender?
Gender fluid.
Yeah, but there's like a different word that's not. Yeah, but okay, fine.
Androgynous.
Androgynous. That's the word I wanted. Yeah, so he's very androgynous. Like, so he's someone that's easy to really set apart. And I'm, as someone who hasn't listened to that much Russian rock, like I know like single hits by lots of bands, but until I've listened to other bands, Russian bands, that I'm like, oh, this band is amazing. Until I get to that point, I am seeing Kino as something of like an anomaly, of an exception, and like. So while I agree with you that nothing happens in a vacuum, but to what extent Tsoi is like an actual genius is an interesting question. That's my point.
Well, I'm just, I'm not necessarily endorsing Brian Eno's idea 100%, but I think it does raise an interesting question.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm not disputing the existence of geniuses, right? Like,
right.
We all have our favorites, but we also have to recognize that a lot of this shit can't happen without some kind of, I don't know if I want to say institutional support, but there's got to be some kind of apparatus for some sort of fertile ground, that encourages its development.
Yeah, and I think the film definitely emphasizes like all the people that helped Tsoi, right? Especially Mike Nomenko, although I should note that from my brief research, it seems like Mike is given kind of the role of this other guy, Boris. Did you read about this guy? This other guy Boris Grebenshikov. He actually like produced, I think, Kino's first album, and he founded a band called Aquarium.
He's in the movie. There's a guy named Boris that produces the album.
Right. But I just think he seems like he was more significant in helping Kino along in actual reality. That's my only point. Yeah.
Well, if we're getting into the movie, there are a lot of interesting topics there. I mean, you've got like the old guard represented by Mike, who is more of a traditionalist, I guess, or rock traditionalist, and Tsoi is like more of an innovator. And he's also,
I don't know about that. You should clarify, because someone might think that you mean like a Soviet music, but Mike's listening to the most like cutting edge Western music.
No, I know, but maybe I'm influenced by something I read after the movie, but apparently he, unlike Tsoi, he did basically plagiarize a lot of the Western music he was listening to. Sometimes even just like singing translated.
You're right. That was crazy
lyrics.
To read. That was very bizarre to read about that.
Well, it's no different from early, Anglo-American rock stars who ripped off all those blues artists, right? They just, and sometimes even like stole their royalties by claiming them as their own. Led Zeppelin did that, and
that's true, but it wasn't that. I feel like that was more, and you might be right 100%, but that seemed more like that was about taking a sound, whereas this was like actually taking the lyrics and the melodies.
No, they did that too.
Okay,
I mean,
fair enough.
They cover, it wasn't until the Beatles started writing their own material really that original songs were performed. Like if you were going to be a rocker in the late 50s or early 60s, you're going to probably perform someone else's songs. I mean, Elvis never wrote a song. He just played other people's shit. And when the Beatles started, they were doing Chuck Berry, Little Richard,
right.
the Stones too, and Robert Johnson, and on and on. And then, Led Zeppelin, they ripped off a lot of people. Sometimes even like Dazed and Confused. There's actually another song called Dazed and Confused. And they just, changed a couple of lines here and there.
Okay, well then I'll just say that then the notable difference then could be that was kind of like the genre expectation in the times that you're describing, in the case of like Elvis, for example, whereas Mike was doing this for really avant-garde, absolute originals like Dylan. So you know that he would. I'm just saying, Mike is someone who celebrates true artistry, and you'd think that comes with a certain ethos of what it means to be an artist. That's why I was kind of surprised in a sense, right?
I don't know anything about him other than the depiction in the movie,
sure,
and from what I read about, you know, people who are actually there, they think the movie is shit. They think it's a complete misrepresentation. So maybe it's not an accurate depiction of him or the scene at all. But I'm just going on that, like just based on what I saw this afternoon. It's interesting because you've got, you know, like the old guard, and then a sort of changing of the guard takes place, and there's even a woman who is to some extent shared by the two representatives of old and
very
new.
Interesting love story, I thought. I mean, just the way that plays out is you know, it obviously adds a lot of tension to the film. She's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just very interesting. I thought it was played quite. What did you think about the way that her relationship with Mike, for example?
Well, I like that openness they have. You know,
right.
She tells him, I fantasize about kissing Viktor, and he says, okay, do you need me to give you a written permission slip? Do it.
But did you feel sorry for him? Like he was
for
like
who, Mike?
Yeah.
No, come on.
Yeah,
no.
Well, I mean, if your woman wants to be with another guy, it can't feel great.
Well, be with him how? She's not leaving him. She told Viktor clearly, I tell him everything, and this changes nothing between, you know, me and my husband.
Yeah, I'm just saying I wouldn't be thrilled if my wife told me that, you know.
Well, I'm older than you, so
yeah.
maybe that has something to do with it. I mean,
anyway, yeah, we don't have to get
of
too
course
sucked into the love story.
Yeah, it's not
interesting though.
It's not. Maybe it's not ideal, but I don't know. Sometimes we make allowances for these things.
For sure.
But I don't even know why we're discussing this. But I just wanted to say, like, these two characters, at different times I sympathized with one more than the other. Like, I like Mike. I think.
Yeah, me too.
As he's depicted in the film, like,
sure.
You know, I admire his dedication to the craft, right?
Absolutely.
But
he sees talent and he's like, this needs to be recorded.
And see, instead of getting jealous and saying, well, fuck that guy, my wife wants to kiss him or fuck him or whatever, he's like, I've got to help him record these songs.
Yeah, that's amazing. I like that too.
Yeah, he's a great mentor, and he says, you know, stop focusing on the sound, okay? The important thing is the songs. Get them out there, let go of them, release them. That's a very important piece of advice, you know.
Sure.
I mean, of course, you want them to sound as good as possible or as much like what you hear in your head as possible, but the important thing is to get the songs out there. It's the song, and that's why, you know, probably Tsoi is a greater genius than you know, Mike. Just like, I don't know, I'm thinking of the Rolling Stones now. Like, Brian Jones was the founder of the Rolling Stones, and he was like a blues purist. But he never wrote a fucking song, you know? It was Jagger and Richards who wrote the material. So, who's more important today, or who has more of a legacy? I mean,
right.
Brian Jones died early, but he would have never written anything. He's a fantastic, you know, instrumentalist, guitarist. He learned sitar. Yeah, but he didn't have, I've read some of the Stones bios, you know, the power was with the songwriters.
Right.
And that's because it's the song. If you don't have a song, you don't have anything.
Let's do a little aside about this idea of sound because I think that's interesting. So I went all the way across St. Petersburg today to buy a vinyl of Grupa Krovi, right?
Okay.
And a typical vinyl, if you buy it new, costs minimum 3,000 rubles, which is about, let's say, $40. Yeah?
Okay.
That's like a typical price. It's $40. So I'm trying to I'm cheap, so I found like a secondhand one, original press from 1991 for like $25. So I went across town, got this like Soviet version, crazy version by the way. But anyway, and I get home and I start listening to it, and the quality is shitty, which is annoying because I do have some old vinyl, like I get, and that sounds fine, but it just sounds shitty, and like I don't want to listen to it. Like I'd rather listen to my Apple laptop speakers and YouTube. Like it sounds a lot crisper, a lot better. So now I'm like asking for my money back from this guy, and I'm just saying like sound. It's just that's a random aside, but like okay, another reason I bring that up is because a huge amount of Tsoi's catalog was recorded really shitty production quality. Like I'm talking like his early 80s stuff, it's like almost unlistenable. But like that song from the movie, the Beatnik song, which I thought was badass. Like I went and found the original, and it's a minute and 20 something seconds, and you can't imagine how bad quality it is. So the question of like importance of recording quality, I'm just saying it's an interesting aside for Kino in particular, you know.
So how did that affect your appreciation of the song? Are you saying like
sound quality is important? Yeah, recording quality is important. Like I think even like listening, and so even listening to Russian rock, sometimes I feel like the sound can be kind of like muddy, and like not crisp enough. We've talked about that with rock music overall. Like that's been one of the things. So and that's one of the reasons I like more some of the Kino stuff that I listened to like more recently, which sounds more like new wave, and like with that drum machine sound, it's just more dancey, and it just sounds more distinctive, more catchy, more. I like it more, and it's like really critical. Like I want that aspect of Kino. So when I listen to this vinyl now, and it's just like it's kind of like murky and just it takes a lot of the sheen away. That's all.
Well, of course, you want it to sound as good as possible, but I'm just saying that at some point, Mike, the character in the film, is right.
Absolutely.
At some point, you have to let it go, and you have to accept that. And that's true of anything. It's I'm sure it's true for painters, and it's definitely true of book writing or poetry. Like you have to abandon it at some point.
For sure.
But the song is what's important, and you can't get too attached to one version, right? Like someone might do a cover version of a song that's better than the original.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to accept that, but it's still the same song, and you should let a thousand flowers bloom. Is that the expression, the Maoist expression, or is it 100 flowers? But let there be many varieties of it. The song, if it's a good song, will live on in all these different versions.
Yeah, and I think something, especially with like singer-songwriters like Bob Dylan, the song ultimately does trump the specific studio sound. Like it's not as crucial maybe to sound slick, right? It's a poem, and it's I mean, did you like the Beatnik song?
Less so.
I thought that was great. Really?
Less so. I mean, I heard it in the movie, and
the movie.
I listened to it. Yeah, you mean like when Mike joins him and adds the electric guitar accompaniment? That's interesting.
Yeah. But just nice. The lyrics were great. I thought, like, basically, like, you used to be a beatnik, or you said you were a beatnik, something like that. It's just about like selling your soul, basically, right? But that kind of purist lyricism is always going to be appealing, right? Like, stay innocent and don't sell out. Basically.
It's like the Clash song "Death or Glory." there's the line, "He who fucks nuns will later join the church."
Exactly.
What's the Russian equivalent of a beatnik, though? Do they use the same word?
Well, yeah, that was interesting because that's the word that they were using in the song, beatnik. And
So
then again,
that's-
that just shows the power
What
of
is
the
it
West
in Russian?
again.
It's beatnik. How do you
Beatnik.
say it?
Beatnik.
Beatnik.
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine how to spell it in Cyrillic.
And then there's the song more early on in the film when they're on the beach, which I love that beach scene, by the way. And it's like, so there you've got like the glamorized slacker, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like seen as the, and that's, you could think of like Beck's loser there,
What's the Russian word for slacker?
I'm not sure. That would be good to
Like
check
that wouldn't have even been a thing in the late 80s. That didn't become prevalent until like Linklater's Slacker, right?
There's that film too. Yeah, that's a good point.
So I wonder. But I didn't mention this before, and it's not in my notes, but I just thought of it. This idea of Magnetizdat, there's the Samizdat underground publishing of books, and then Magnetizdat was underground magnetized tape recordings, and so you wonder, like, how did Mike get all these recordings? Are they bootleg? Like, were they smuggled into the Soviet Union? Like, how did they get there? Did the CIA somehow,
I mean, I know there was
them
this whole
across
thing
the
about
border?
there was this thing about bone music in the Soviet Union where they took like X-ray stuff and they were using that to make records. I can research that more, but that's basically something, there's another film I can recommend which goes into that particular concept. Ribs, they called it. Sorry, Ribs recording. It's I'll just read you this very quickly. Also known as music on ribs are improvised gramophone recordings made from X-ray films. Mostly made through the 1950s and 1960s, ribs were a black market method of smuggling in and distributing music that was banned in the Soviet Union. But maybe that was a bit before, though. I mean, that's 50s, 60s, right? So,
yeah, but could have included some Elvis and some early Beatles and British Invasion stuff.
For sure. But I mean, we saw like a bunch of vinyl on the walls in the movie and stuff, so like, it seemed like they were able to get decent quality stuff by that time,
Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious about the mechanics of it, or the logistics of it. Like, how did it get into the country? How did they buy it? Maybe it was much more open. I mean, borders are always more porous than we think,
Yeah, what's funny right now is like companies like Apple have pulled out of Russia. So Russia responded by legalizing something called parallel imports, where basically they officially encourage importing through Kazakhstan. So now, like, Apple goes to Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan just brings their Apple shit into Russia. So like, you still get it at official Apple shops and stuff. I mean, know what I mean? It's like
there's always a back door.
Yeah, but it's funny when it's just crazy, man. It's a crazy time to be alive, and hopefully it's not the last time, the end time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought another interesting thing was like just that there's this Korean actor, Tae Yoo, who plays
and
Viktor.
he looks like 100% Korean, like Korean mother and father. He's more Korean looking than Tsoi himself, right?
Yeah, and he is Korean. He's a South Korean actor, and it's interesting because I mean he was born in Germany, but I don't know if he has any connection to Russia at all. And if not, like, how did he speak Russian for this film?
Yeah,
that's crazy to me.
Yeah,
I guess people do these things, but
they couldn't find like a Korean Russian that looked like him to play that role.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
kind of
not.
surprising because I knew like a guy who had a similar background to Tsoi here in Moscow, you know. So I mean, they exist. Is my point.
Wait, you're
We-
in Moscow now?
No, like when I lived in Moscow, I
When
knew
you
a
were in
guy.
Moscow? Oh.
Yeah, and we met when we were in Far East. We met a lot of people of like Korean ancestry.
Mhm.
Or at least we saw them.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of like the way the film was shot in terms of like that whole like scene of I am a passenger and bringing in all that Western music?
I didn't like the musical parts, you know.
Really?
Yeah, there was what? Psycho Killer, The Passenger.
I thought you were gonna dig all this stuff. But go on, why not?
It was, I don't know, it was too cartoonish. I didn't like that. I liked the use of the chorus, that guy, the skeptic or whatever, who would comment on things, and his
right, this did not happen.
Yeah,
right.
This did not happen was his tagline, which was great. I like that. But and they did Perfect Day. I mean, it was.
And I liked that it was coming out of all these like Soviet faces, right? Like these Soviet babushkas.
Yeah.
Like that. I don't know. It's just my heart went out to like that life. You know, that's why I was glad you could see this movie, because you could see. I mean, I know you already know this stuff. Like you're someone who's like very well versed in like Russia, compared to the average person outside of Russia, and you've been to Russia. So, but you know, that flavor of life in the 80s is like. It's like endearing to me. I pity it, you know.
Well, I'm glad I saw it. It was fascinating, just as a cultural artifact. But you know, it's like the movie Mamma Mia or something. There's just like a
really.
Yeah, there's just a there's something about rock songs being used in a musical that is not always that appealing to me.
I get it, and like I totally get it. That guy, by the way, is like quite a controversial figure, you know.
The director.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying. Like a lot of people that were there said this is bullshit. You know, it's like we talked about God Save the Queen last time, but Johnny Rotten said, you know, the movie Sid and Nancy was complete garbage, even though he praised Gary Oldman's performance as Sid. He's like, this is just fucking nonsense. And that often happens with rock bios. The Doors hated Oliver Stone's The Doors, you know. They said it was a complete misrepresentation of Jim Morrison, and on, you know.
Well, I get that, but I'm just like, I'm sad when I see that stuff too, because I feel like the musicians should also realize that for a person like me, an outsider, this film absolutely draws me in, you know, and romanticizes that period. I mean, I get that they might object to that romanticization, but at the same time, it beautifies this music. It portrays the music in a way that's like, you know, like for example, what they did with the Beatnik song. That made like that song great, you know, in a way that if I went back and listened to that original version, I wouldn't have really given a shit. I'm just saying, so I'd like to see it not as something like trashy and commercial, but something deeper, you know, with more heart. And I think they should give it some credit.
Well, I think it'd be worthwhile to go back and watch this. I guess it's a sci-fi film from that actual period, 87, 88, 89, Asa, which features Kino's performance of Хочу перемен at the end of the movie. I actually, went and watched the last few minutes. It's a great performance, and just before, like they're in an office. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. But I think It's probably available on that Soviet Films Online.
That's where I saw it. That's where I saw it.
Okay.
I just looked that up right after, and I'd like to watch the whole thing. But at the end, Viktor Tsoi and someone else, I guess it's his bandmate, they're in an office talking to some bureaucrat, this, you know, fat woman with a mustache, and she's saying, "You may not leave the stage unless you are ill. You may not deviate from the lyrics that have been submitted to or for approval. You may not. And while she's droning on, the two of them stand up, walk out of her office, go to the stage, and start performing Хочу перемен.
Right.
And it's
Nice.
and he's, he does have an androgynous look. He's got makeup on, and he's doing some, I don't know, some Iggy Pop or David Bowie choreography.
Right.
It sounds different from the later recorded version, more raw. It's an interesting scene, and I'd like to see the rest of the movie, even though I understand, their performance really has nothing to do with the movie. But it's probably an interesting film. Asa.
Nice. And there's one other film we could shout out, which I haven't seen, but which Viktor Tsoi starred in, and it's called The Needle.
Oh, yes, I saw
And,
that too.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be quite good, actually. But yeah, should we keep jumping around? I mean, I have some.
Yeah.
Okay, I will say another thing. What I like about the music is that living here in St. Petersburg, I like how much the lyrics talk about rain and just the kind of. I guess it's quite existential in a sense, like the themes. It's just like he's defining life by the small things. By cigarettes, by beer, by the relationships. I don't know. I like the lyricism.
That's what I was
Yeah.
trying to say earlier. It's like quotidian details, just everyday life under Soviet conditions at that time. So
Right.
there's kind of like a kitchen sink drama feel about it,
And finding the beauty in all this stuff that's around him is quite endearing. What else?
Oh, you sent me a video of Metallica covering.
Oh yeah, that's interesting, right?
Covering Grupa. What was it? Grupa Krovi in Moscow.
Yeah, which by the way, like that opening track, the first two songs on Grupa Krovi are just absolutely epic to me. And they're because basically what I do with a lot of Kino songs is I just play the shit out of like individual songs like for a week or two, and the second song is like about close the door, I'm leaving now, and it's really good as well. Zakroy za mной dверь, я ухожу. Yeah, close the door behind me, I'm leaving. That song is really good. But yeah, that was cool to see. I mean, Metallica are really loved here in Russia, and that concert is from 2019, and yeah, so they put the effort in. One of the rare groups, probably.
Do you think they knew about Kino before they? Like, were they listening to him back in the day?
I doubt it. Probably it's more like we're going there. Let's we know we're but it's still like a nice gesture.
Oh,
on their part, right?
it's beautiful. I'm surprised they did that, and I applaud them for that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Robert Trujillo, it looked like he was reading. While they're performing, he's playing bass, and he's got the lyric sheet in Russian on the music stand. I mean, that's fantastic. But again, just imagine if some Russian performer came to the States or something and did a Beatles song. People would be like, "Yeah, of course you should know it."
Right.
Why is it? Why are we so impressed when it's the other way?
Right.
Well, we know why, because that's just how it is. Like, it's more likely that a Russian musician will know a Lou Reed song than that Lou Reed would know a Viktor Tsoi song.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know what we say about that. Like, do we just accept that as the way it is? Do we try to listen to more world music?
I think. Well, we can do whatever we want, but we don't need to chastise ourselves for it, do we? We listen. We can't. We only have so much time and energy, right? We can't listen to everything, and if you
I will say
want
the one thing
if
we
you
can
want
do
to
better.
restrict yourself that way and say I must listen only to, you know, music that is not in English, if that's what you enjoy.
No,
then
no,
go
but
ahead.
I will say that like what I'm guilty of, and like I'm more than willing to say it, is like underrating music that's outside of the Western canon. You know, like I'll listen to stuff like Kino, and I'll be like, yeah, in the beginning, you know, I'm like, oh, this is a good song. That's cool that I found, oh, Russian rock can produce a good song, you know? That's like fucked up, but that's true. Like so it's more like I'm always pleasantly surprised when I hear good Russian rock rather than being like expecting it, rather than thinking that it's absolutely of the standard of like the best in the Western music.
Well,
so
as long as, I mean, I don't think we need to feel too guilty about that. As long as we're open to it, you know, we're able to discover things that we like.
Sure, I'm just saying we shouldn't underrate music from other cultures. And
Well,
that's what I have done that.
Tsoi actually commented on that. Where did I see that? Somewhere this past week I saw it. Like when they went to France, he said, I think he was talking about playing big stadium shows, and someone asked, that's great, isn't it? He's like, well, it is and it isn't, you know. There are pros and cons. It's like, I don't know how these people really view me. Like they're just impressed that Russians can play guitars and perform rock music that sort of sounds like Western rock, but not exactly. Like what's he couldn't really explain the popularity. I'm sure that was.
Here's how I took that, because I was about to bring up the exact same quotes, but again, like remembering them only half. But what I understood him saying is that he felt like people were almost underwhelmed because they wanted the sound to be more like Russian and exotic, and actually it just kind of sounded like it belonged,
like an imitation of Western rock or whatever, or you know, just Western rock sung in Russian or
right.
something.
So
like
either
that.
way, he obviously, he wasn't overwhelmed. He was underwhelmed by the experience of playing abroad. That's what it sounded like, or that tour that he went on.
Yeah.
But yeah, any of the. I'm sorry. Is there anything else you specifically want to address? Because I can run through my notes really quick and see what I think is still
before you
interesting.
do that, this is a very general point. You know, this is the second musical episode in a row.
Right.
I don't know if we say it's the second episode about a song. I mean, we've done, I don't know, 2 or 3 other episodes on music, right?
Sure.
But last time, was it the last episode on the Sex Pistols' God Save the Queen? The word aesthetics came up, and I wanted to remind myself and you and whoever else that aesthetics, you know, this term, it comes from the Greek verb meaning to perceive, to sense, or to feel, which, I mean, when we're looking at text, we're always dealing with aesthetic issues, right? But isn't it interesting that word has to do with the senses and feeling? So every text affects a different sense, a different one of the, or maybe 2 of the 5 senses, right? Like a song that's for the ears, but if we're considering visual aspects of a performance, or you know, like Bowie's Sound and Vision, it's the eye too.
Mm-hmm.
So what other text, like a literary text, is if we read song lyrics as literary text, what's that? Also the eye.
No, it can't be the eye. I mean, words are not the eye.
So what are they? Which of the senses do they affect?
It's the brain. It's emotion.
So it's all of them?
No, it's
but it's always through the senses, isn't it? At least.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, like, well, you write in imagery, right? So
that's what I'm saying.
Your writing is so it depends on what the text is doing.
Of course, it's all processed by the brain, but we experience in our incarnate forms. We experience through the senses. At least that's how the Greeks understand aesthetics, right? Because it's sensing, perceiving, feeling, right? So it comes through the eye or the ear or what else, like the sense of taste. That's just cooking. Like, could there be a culinary text? Like, could we do an episode on pizza or something? Or some dish,
Well, obviously, like, if you're talking about good writing, again, and if I'm telling my students, so obviously they're going to want to appeal to the sense of taste as well. So in that sense...
But if they read it on the page, it's through the eye, and maybe ear if they read it aloud.
No. If you're describing the taste of something, that is appealing to the taste. It's not about the eye. It doesn't matter what faculty it comes through. It's like, what is it appealing to? Like, which part of the human experience?
Well, is it the same? You read about someone eating a pizza, you feel like you're eating the pizza?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I experience it the same. But what about a text that
I'm just saying,
like,
go on.
Well, a text that's experienced through the nose, like perfume. Is that art? Is that a text? Could we do an episode on what's the famous Chanel No. 5 or something?
Well, or the book Perfume, right?
Well, yeah, of course. That's what I was thinking of. But again, that's a literary text and also a movie now. But even though it appeals to the sense of smell, your initial experiences through the eye because you're reading it. Or what if you read like the Braille book version? Then it's the sense of touch. There we go. And maybe a painting.
I mean, I think you're talking about like the literal way that you're like experiencing it versus like the experience of what it means to be human in these different ways, like the human I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, it's not. Anyways, I just think you're getting confused if you're saying like that you're experiencing words are like appealing to the eyes. I mean,
they are.
It's the message of the words
initially.
Though.
Well,
but we're not like thinking about the shape of the text or something.
Well, I do. The concrete form of the text. I mean, there's something tactile about it too. If you're typing the words or writing them by hand, I know this has nothing to do with Kino at this point, but I wanted to bring it up because it came up last time, and I wasn't prepared to talk about it. But just more generally, as we consider text, this is part of our linguistic tradition. As English speakers, we have this concept from the Greeks of aesthetics, but it's important to remember, to them, it was all about the senses, and I guess you would have to say the pleasures of the senses, right?
Okay, so let me break a couple things down just to make sure I'm following you. Because I know, first of all, aesthetic now is really interesting, and like it's overused now. Like it's being used with no, like, okay, I'll give you an example. I was doing like a PowerPoint presentation with little 8th grade kids on Friday, and this like, we got some of these girls especially who like love the design aspect of the PowerPoint, and this like boy was like kidding around, and he's like aesthetic Paulina, like, because like, so that word is just thrown around to mean now like, aesthetic, right? The appearance. I guess so. We think of aesthetic now as appearance, right? The visual representation, and you're telling us that it shouldn't be. We should think of it as more than the visual, right?
It's everything. It's anything that the senses can experience.
Right. So how did it evolve? To like this understanding now of like the visual representation? Well,
as I say, I think. To the Greeks, it was about the pleasures of the senses. Like, they were very interested in why Aristotle wanted to know why we have certain feelings when we watch a Greek tragedy, for example. Like we experience catharsis, which is horrible,
Right,
but also
right.
pleasurable because it's a release.
Sure. But I mean, do
So-
you know why it came to represent just mainly the visual and the way it's used now?
Well, because of its association with art, and most of the time when we say art, and remember, art is a Roman word, which is basically like, technique or craft or something,
Right.
not like artsy fartsy,
Right.
although it could maybe include that too. But I think when we talk about art, if you take an art class, what do? You it's mostly visual art. It might include sculpture or something, but it's not like literary art or musical art. That's different. That's separated. That's like literature is over here, music is over here, drama is over here, the visual art's over there. But I'm trying to argue for a reintegration of all those, like the
Okay.
Wagnerian total artwork that I also mentioned last time. Like Wagner thought of his operas as music dramas. It's like you got the lyrics, you got the music, you got the stage design, you got the costumes. Like all of that together must be given due attention. All of those details must be worked out, and it's like
Right.
Bowie's sound and vision. It's
Well, and Kandinsky, we got into that in the Kandinsky episode.
yes,
as well.
yes, and I think that's how it came up. To be fair, we were talking about synesthesia, right? That
Right.
aesthesia is the aesthetic, and sin is together, or it's all of them mixed up. But that's the connection. Okay, I'm off track, but this was a nice,
No worries.
nice,
No,
nice
it's
detour.
interesting.
Something to keep in mind for future episodes, because we're always talking about the senses, and I would say the pleasures of the senses, because if these things don't give pleasure, what are we doing? Like, why are we
Sure.
spending our time if we don't like them in some way?
They
You
give
know-
a lot of Kino have been giving me a lot of pleasure. So much pleasure you can't imagine.
Okay,
and I think that's important.
orgasmic pleasure.
I mean, it's just interesting. I mean, I don't even know how to answer that, right? But like, it's just interesting how, how much I can listen to one song, for example, and listen to it with the fear that I'm going to overplay it or whatever. But and Kino's sound is like a little bit melancholy, I would say. Like, it's not exactly positive, happy music, but it has that thrust enough to kind of, that would be like what overwhelms the sadness, is just that it's like rocking, right?
Mhm.
But
Well, it's
I want
interesting.
to-
I think I raised this issue when you were soliciting questions for interview
Right.
subjects, but
right.
it's and this came up in the movie too, like their use of the drum machine. In the film, their drummer gets drafted into the
Right.
army, and there's that poignant scene where the mother is like yelling at him, no, don't let him send you to Afghanistan.
Right, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
But
Pretty relevant right
yeah,
now.
Yeah, so they lose the drummer, and then they're like, what are we going to do? Well, we got a drum machine, and then there's that debate with Mike. You can't use a drum machine. That's not rock and roll. That's not part of the tradition. He's like,
Right.
well, he says, that's disco. He's like, so what? Bowie plays disco. If Mark Bolan had lived, he would be playing disco too. So
Right.
we're gonna do what we're gonna do.
Yeah, I mean, I like the drum machine sound to some extent. I mean, it has its advantages and disadvantages, but it definitely kind of gives that like dancey flavor.
Yeah, it has. That's what gives it that '80s,
Right.
new wave kind of
Exactly.
sound. But there's also like it's not like, Anglo-American new wave, because it's still kind of raw and rough with the other instrumentation. It's more, there's some keyboards, but it's not as keyboard driven as like Anglo-American new wave.
Right, like New Order or or Depeche Mode. I don't know if that's
Yes, yeah, it's more guitar based, and
Yeah.
and in a very interesting way. I mean, I just sampled a few Group of Crovey tracks tonight or this afternoon. I really like the sound. Like, I want to listen to that, much more carefully. It's quite
I hope so.
different from Хочу перемен. I hope I'm pronouncing all these words right, but
You're doing well. You're doing very well. All right, I want to tell you my little anecdote now, and I want your feedback on it.
yeah.
And also, like, before I tell you that, like, what would be like a Kino equivalent in America? I mean, you mentioned Kurt Cobain as like a Tsoi equivalent. Would you then say Nirvana or
No,
the closest we can get?
Well, not
Okay,
in terms of sound. I mean, like I said, they sound
No, not in terms of sound. In terms of like
cultural impact.
cultural impact, cultural importance.
Oh yeah, well then maybe it's maybe it's like the grunge scene of the '90s with Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden.
Okay.
Not
Is
but
there anyone
not-
else
not
from a
in
different
terms of-
generation?
not in terms of sound, but
Are there any other bands but I mean I'm telling you also, like, just in terms of Kino are the most famous band, right? So even forgetting the sound, even forgetting the time period, who's that for America? Like, who's
I
the
mean-
biggest band?
well, I don't know about in terms of fame, but Tsoi reminds me of Dylan in a way, like his commitment to the song more so than the band. Like, he didn't even
Yeah.
care that, as it's depicted in the movie, like the name is just an afterthought. They're just like, okay, well, it can't have more than 2 syllables, and they walk by a movie theater and they're like, oh, how about Kino? Okay, and they
Right.
have a couple
Although it
of
does
other
sound like
possibilities.
he was a pretty big film fan, so just to
Okay. Well, but
But no, I get you. Okay, so let's say some hybrid of Bob Dylan / Nirvana in American culture, right? So that's either way. So I had and I may have told you this story before, but I had a cool student last year in Moscow named Yesia. She was like 17, quirky and huge music fan. Like, she went deep with music. And
Western
made some-
music or Russian music or everything.
everything,
Okay.
but mainly like rock and like punk, I would
Okay.
say. But also rap. But yeah, sometimes I feel like we were kind of like trying to like outswag each other and like whose knowledge was deeper, because like
Yes.
my initial reaction to a student is always like, come on, you're not on my level in terms of like knowledge. But I had this like, I took a picture once of these like vinyl records that I have on a wall, and she was like, oh, not bad taste, Mr. B. And I was like, shh, like, who, you're not even like on my level to even comment, but fair enough. I was just glad that she knew some of the albums that like I listened to. I was impressed by that. Either way, that's like some backstory. She knows her shit pretty well, especially when it comes to like Russian music. And like I told her that I was listening to Kino, and she kind of like scoffed at me, and she kind of she dismissed, and because for her there's like only a couple Kino songs, first of all, that are like passable, that she likes, and the rest is just, she sees it as anyone would who's like a music snob and hardcore into music. They tend to be somewhat derisive of like the mainstream, right? So for her, Kino just like too commercial and overblown and maybe not worthy of their fame. And so then I had like was like arguing with her. I was like, no, but like, look, I'm coming from the outside. Like, I'm not judging it through all that lens of, it doesn't have. I'm not enjoying it for its power in Russia, obviously, because as a foreigner, it's like I'm directly experiencing the music in a way that like Russians maybe can't, because I don't have all the baggage. So either way, I just like, it's weird for me that the band that I like the most in Russia is the band that's like huge, and so that just begs questions about like what it means to be mainstream in terms of quality, I guess. And what do you think about any of that shit?
Well, of course, as you're saying this, I'm thinking about people who hate the Beatles or say they hate the Beatles. Fine, okay. What are you gonna do?
So in terms of the Beatles are amazing, and like in that sense, I'm I'm validated, right? Because like,
But not
you don't have to
everyone
try and
agrees.
convince-
A lot
sure,
of people.
but I'm happy to dismiss those people.
Okay.
Because I'm more confident in my point. Like, I'm more confident to say the Beatles are great. Whereas like Kino, as an outsider, like, I don't know yet if I'm like really in the place to judge their quality, especially like in comparison to their peers.
Well, that's
you know?
okay. I mean, why is it necessary to evaluate them or place them in a hierarchy? You know, like
Sure,
if
sure.
your ear, trust your ear. If you like what you hear, then it has
100%.
it has value. But you're not going to be able to experience the lyrics the way you would, say, a Beatles
Right.
song or a Dylan song or whatever. But you could still get something from it. I mean, I went through this with, I guess, first of all, with like Japanese music, you know, like when I long ago was married to a Japanese and I started experiencing Japanese language TV and movies and music and so on, you know, it's hard, if not impossible, to experience it in the same way I would something that's English based, you know, or anything like literature and translation. You're always missing something, but you still know, like, I still know that I love Proust and Dostoevsky and so on, even though
Right,
my
right.
experience of it is different from what a native speaker would experience. Or
Okay,
I
I'm
know
gonna force
that
you.
I know that, you know, Greek tragedy is great.
I want to force you to like take a position then on I'll give you your options. You can't say both and. Yeah. So it's like,
Okay.
so like for being like a hugely popular musician, is that like is that an indicator of great quality, or is it something to be suspicious of? Which do you lean towards? Does that make sense?
I think it depends. Yes, I think it depends on
Okay.
the time. I think now it's something to be suspicious of. I mean, a
Okay.
lot of shit that's. But maybe that's a generational.
I think I'm inclined
thing.
to agree. Though.
Maybe that's
Yeah,
a
it could be, but-
generational thing. Maybe I'm just too old. But you know, the shit that people tell me they like now, it's just
Drake, son. No, sorry, Drake's old by now anyway.
well, I was thinking of someone like what's his name, Ed Sheeran or something.
Yeah, that's a good example actually. That's a really good example.
I mean, like.
or Coldplay.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry to say that.
yeah,
but,
Coldplay, whatever. I mean, I like some of their songs, but you know,
but it's vanilla. It's vanilla.
it's just not for me. Like,
It's vanilla.
I don't know. I don't even know enough about it, and I don't care. You know what I mean? It's just, but
It's interesting for this particular question.
well, but I think it might have something to do with the era in which these figures are celebrated. Like, rock and roll is dead. You know, like the heyday.
Or is it?
Well, Lenny
Or
Kravitz,
music stars, but
Lenny Kravitz said it was back in the 90s. So
Lenny Kravitz is pretty corny himself.
yeah, he's his shit is dead too. But
But my point is, like, we need good music to help elevate a society, right? So Kino, that's pretty quality music to like elevate the Russian people in the 80s. So like,
I
you
think
know,
so,
we need-
but you can't. I mean, this student wasn't even around then, so maybe she's not the best person to ask. But what did the well, I guess the Russian people themselves have spoken. Like, they have shrines to him all over.
absolutely,
So-
they love Tsoi.
Yeah,
and he's
so-
great, and I'm pretty confident saying that Kino are a great band. I'm just saying, like, is our time like able to promote good artists to the mainstream now, or are they like doomed because of just the nature of our world right now? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean,
Like, I feel like we talked about this before, and I think this is like a common theme for me, that I'm like,
well,
please.
I don't worry about it to the same degree that you do. Like, if we're talking about music, I tend to listen mostly to the so-called legacy artists, which is just the euphemism for old and irrelevant. You know, the people who are not Billie Eilish or whatever the fuck. That's fine.
They're pretty relevant, bro. The bands you listen to are pretty huge. The Stones, the Beatles. That's like
now
massive. It's still they're like massive in the culture.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it depends on whom you ask.
Bro, my students listen. My seventh grade students know the Beatles more than they know. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's.
They know more about the Beatles than Billie Eilish.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
To be honest,
then maybe there's hope.
And I think no, but I'm saying we still rely on bands like the Beatles because we don't have new Beatles, because our society now struggles to create, and that's what I'm saying. We need it, but because like, how are we going to get out of situations like what what we're seeing in global politics right now, without artists who are able to get massive popularity and like lead us in a healthy direction, like to elevate our consciousness. We need that right now so badly. You know?
Well, I mean, my pessimistic view on this is that it won't be allowed. Those voices are not going to be supported by the gatekeepers, you know? They're going to.
Yeah, that's possible.
They're going to shut them down.
But they have to make music that's like so good that, you know, and people have to want to hear it. I don't know, but I think I guess it's you know, maybe if the situation gets desperate enough, then like that music will it will be like a drug, you know. It'll be like that aesthetical necessity.
The red pill.
I guess, but red pill's the bad one, isn't it?
Oh, is it the blue pill? I don't know.
What's the one that wakes you up? It's
either way. I forget.
I don't know, man. I'm just like very much in like doomsday mode recently.
Well,
obvious events.
Yes, so I think we all are. I mean, many of us are. It's troublesome time.
Yeah, and so like art could be one of the things that saves us. You know, even if saves us doesn't mean like we're actually going to save the planet, but like it'll at least like save our dignity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
oh, well, I've been pretty much on board with that for I don't know how long, a long time.
Yeah. All right, I think I've done enough ranting. Should we wrap it up there, or is there anything else you want to say? I mean, I really want people to listen to Kino, and we'll post all kinds of links for the films we've discussed and the music we've discussed. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, I'm glad that you introduced me to this, because I was completely unfamiliar with it. So it's great for me to have experienced this, however, you know, surface my exposure to it has been. I know now where to go if I want to take a deeper dive, as they say.
Yeah. And I just think getting a picture, like, was anything surprising, or did you, about the way that Russia was, or the Soviet Union was portrayed in the movie, for example, like, or is that just kind of how you assumed things were?
Well, I had no idea. I mean, it's the way that Leningrad Rock Club was organized was surprising, I guess, like, because I had no clue about how that worked. Like, it was like an official Communist Party organization, and then you gotta like go get approved, and they examine your lyrics. Like, that's crazy. But I like the fact that,
at the same time, they did allow it, right? So it's like one of those double-edged swords or whatever. Like, it had two sides to it, because it's encouraging that they allowed it.
Yeah, but then, you know, Tsoi was kind of like, fuck this, and he pushed the boundaries. He sort of forced them to accept him, kind of like how punk forced itself on, you know, on the contemporary scene too. It's like, you can't stop us.
I guess so, but I'm sure Tsoi was playing the game a lot more than, you know, the Sex Pistols. Like,
I don't know about that. The Sex Pistols were kind of like a, you know,
I mean, I guess they were
publicity
signing,
stunt of Malcolm McLaren. So
and they were signing record deals with Richard Branson. So in a way, they were playing the game too.
and maybe even more so. Like you think Johnny Rotten struggled more than Viktor Tsoi?
Right.
I don't think so.
You know what's interesting too is like I dug up an old clip. I think I sent it to you of Kino actually playing at that rock hall, and it is surreal when you see that everyone had to stay seated. You know, like that's just legit how it was.
Well, that's how
it's
early before Beatlemania and the Stones. You know, that's how it was. Or maybe Elvis sort of broke down some of those barriers when he shook his hips and all the females went into convulsions or whatever, allegedly. But well, I don't know what it's
But I mean,
like
I picture like swing bands, and people will at least be dancing. You know.
Yeah.
So,
it is pretty. That I guess that was a bit surprising, but also not really.
Yeah.
But what do I know?
Well, I remember Elton John played in the Soviet Union to mainly like all party members, you know, and they were all just sitting like stoically in suits, you know. But at the same time, they obviously wanted to see him.
Yeah.
So it's like this weird. And they brought this like, I mean, I'm sure he was openly gay at the time, so. Yeah. Any other thoughts about Soviet Union?
Well, just a
80s?
last comment about Tsoi. You know, I admire him for his commitment to songwriting. You know, yes, he had a band. Yes, he was concerned about the visual aspect, and you know, he apparently helped design the album cover artwork and so on. But his focus was the song. You know, write a good song. Right. And that's
good lyrics.
Yeah. Like if it's not a good song when you are playing it with your shitty acoustic guitar and singing into, you know, a tape recorder or your phone or whatever, then you don't have anything. But if you have a good song that sounds good when you're just singing with your guitar or your piano or whatever, then that's something valuable, and you can you record it as well as you can, you perform it as well as you can, you produce it as well as you can, but it's the song that's important.
I like that. I think that's a good place to finish.
Okay. Well, next time.
Have you given any thoughts? Yeah. Have you given any thoughts to our next episode?
Gore Vidal's essay on drugs. I've promised. Okay. I've promised all the druggies out there we're gonna get to that. So that is next.
Great. Awesome.
All right,
everybody. Thanks for listening, and we wish for a peaceful resolution to the current global climate between Russia and the rest of the world, or the West, I should say.
Amen.
Texting.
Hello, Tom. I'm looking at your questions and I cannot answer most of them, but I can share with you my personal feelings, for example, about Kino. So, for example, when you're asking about Kino's guitarists or arrangements, I cannot really tell anything about it, but I used to play guitar, and to be honest, I never was interested in Kino's because of the arrangements or some guitar techniques, something like that. It's not in my case. What I preferred was this combination of lyrics and melody. Probably that. So that's what genius of Tsoi's songwriting ability. He talked about complicated things without referencing to some vague metaphors like other musicians did. Kino, he was really precise in we all understand what he's thinking about, and we all feel instantly related to it. In my understanding, Kino was so popular in Russia because Tsoi was a working class hero, just like the Beatles. That's why we instantly felt related to him. He was natural. He was there was nothing false about him. I'm not sure if you guys know that Tsoi was discovered by Bege, so even his first so-called maybe LP, it was produced by Bege and Trapila. It's really interesting fact. On the other hand, Kinchev from Alisa, they were close friends with Tsoi, and after Tsoi's death, Kinchev and Alisa, they used to perform this song called "Спокойная ночь." Again, more aggressive, more heavy version of this song, but Kinchev used and during this concert used to say, "Here is a song that we're going to sing forever." I think it's a really good example of that. Tsoi was loved not only by just ordinary people, but with peer musicians. It's really important. I remember like my sister cried the day she discovered that Tsoi died. She heard it on the radio. It was August. I was 8 years old, and this really impressed me because I have no idea who Tsoi was at the moment, but it really stick to my mind.